Greetings, friends. I'm James P. Owens, lead pastor of Encounter Church in Rincon, Georgia. Thank you for joining us for this online teaching today. And of course, special hello to my friends down in Brunswick at the home church. Hey, everyone down there. Love y'all. Hope you guys are doing awesome. Now, I would imagine that we all like to think of ourselves as pretty good people, right? You know, at least for the most part. We try to be kind, patient, try to do good things, and, generally do what is right. But then, sometimes something comes along that just drives you to your wits' end, that just pushes you to the brink. Traffic's terrible, catch every red light, long lines wherever you are, the car line at your kid's school that seems to defy the laws of physics in that it never moves. The one that gets me is the automated message on every customer service call. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and then you navigate through the whole system and still don't get to where you want to go. It makes me just want to throw my phone against the wall. And it's even harder when you're tired or hungry, something else going on. And I don't know about you, but at times like that, my first response is always just get it out of my way. Get all these people out of here. Get them out of my way. And that's pretty much what we see from Jesus' disciples in our scripture for today. They are probably tired, maybe hungry, and they just can't seem to drum up a little bit of compassion for a group of folks that are nearby. But instead of scolding them or trying to force them into compassion, Jesus instead invites them. Jesus invites them to see the situation a little differently, to see the people differently, to take a look at them as people and not as problems. The text I'm referring to is Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21, and it is a famous passage. The story, all four Gospels have this. This is one of the accounts of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And it begins with Jesus having compassion on the crowds that are following him. So it's an appropriate text for us to talk about compassion, the third of 4 points of our sort of spiritual check-in that we're starting the year with, compassion. Immediately prior to this text, Matthew narrates for us the execution of John the Baptist, a great prophet and forerunner to Jesus the Messiah. And when we pick up in what I'm about to read to you, it says when Jesus had heard what had just happened, well, that is what had just happened. The death of John the Baptist and Jesus finding out about it. So here is Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Hear the word of the Lord with me. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As the evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the towns and villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fishes, they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, gave thanks, broke the loaves, he gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. So Jesus has just heard about the death of his friend, his cousin, his co-worker in this ministry, John the Baptist. It's a rather gruesome story, actually. The daughter of a ruler called Herod the Tetrarch, who was an enemy of John and Jesus's, asks for his head to be brought to her on a platter. Pretty gross stuff. I don't know if we're intended to take that literally. Probably just a symbol. And no doubt she was just parroting her father's wishes. The Herods, all of them, this kind of family that ruled a lot of the area as sort of puppet rulers underneath the Roman Empire. They were notorious enemies of John the Baptist and of Jesus. And so Jesus hears about this death and he wants to get away. Have a little downtime. hops in a boat with his disciples. They sail across the Sea of Galilee to another place, and it says they're at a remote place, a solitary location. I imagine Jesus and the disciples, maybe they got there thinking, here we go. Now we're at the campsite, right? Now we're out in the woods. We're out in the area where no one is. We can have a little chill time. No demands from these crowds that have been following Jesus. But then just as they dock the boat, what do they see? A crowd has gathered. As happens so often with Jesus, the crowds have followed him. And the disciples are probably a little bit perturbed by this, even as they pulled up, even as they docked the boat. They're probably thinking, wow, what are these people doing here? I thought we were going to get away finally. The disciples are probably irked by that, but not Jesus. Not Jesus. Here's what it says in verse 14. When Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. I know I've mentioned this before, but the word in the New Testament for compassion is splankna in the Greek. It literally means bowels. The verb here is what's used. The splanknitsomai is the verb form, and it literally means to be moved in the bowels. But the point is, for ancient people, this idea of compassion came from somewhere deeper than your mind, deeper than your heart. It came from your gut. Compassion is a gut reaction that we have to the suffering and struggles of other people. It touches something that's, the most human about ourselves, that we want to come alongside other people, suffer with them, struggle with them, in a sense. Jesus had compassion, the text says. He cared about the people. Compassion is kind of like empathy, but there's that willingness to act, willingness to do something. Compassion involves listening and coming alongside. I like to imagine Jesus here, going up to as many people as he can and kind of, sitting with them and saying, what's going on? Tell me about it. How can I help you? And he did what he could, healed those that were sick, had compassion on them. But the disciples, on the other hand, no, they're not cruel or mean, but they are probably, it seems, thinking a little bit more along practical lines here. What's going on with these people? It seems like maybe they see the problem instead of the people. Verse 15 says, as the evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy themselves some food. That's what the disciples say. I don't know, I guess they're not doing too bad here, are they? I mean, obviously they have some concern, or at least they say they do have some concern for the people. They do tell Jesus to send the crowds away, but they say that the reason is so that they can go and buy themselves some food, take care of their needs. They're not willing to do it themselves, the disciples are not, but at least they show some modicum of concern, send them away so that they can take care of themselves, right? At the very least, even the most cynical reading of the disciples' behavior here, you could say they at least have the decency to disguise their indifference as concern. It's honestly more compassionate than a lot of folks in our world today. In today's world, violence, cruelty, and barbarism, we seem to be on a slide towards all of those things. Might makes right has returned as the rule of the day, and people don't even bother to conceal their cruelty very much anymore. But back to the disciples, I'm sure that seeing this, hearing this, Jesus wants to teach them a little bit about compassion. He wants to say, hey, you guys, have some compassion, why don't you? That's what I'd like to say. But how will Jesus do it? Because, you can't force someone to have compassion. You can't just say, hey, have compassion on these people. It doesn't work that way. I find myself almost every day reading an article or social media post and just thinking, I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. And you really can't force compassion. It probably won't work too well if Jesus tried to do that. Because I think one of the reasons is that we're really good as human beings, and all of us do this from time to time, we're really good at justifying ourselves when it comes to our lack of concern or compassion for others. We're really good at coming up with all the reasons why people don't deserve help or why it's their own fault that they got into the situation that they're in. Well, it's their own fault. You know, if they didn't want that to happen, they shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z. Oh, they committed a crime, so they deserve to suffer. You know, they should have not broken the law, or they should have just done what the police officer told them. So Jesus here, he doesn't scold the disciples, or try to cajole them into having compassion. He doesn't yell at them and berate them with how they should have more compassion for the crowds. Instead, what Jesus does is invites them. He gives them an invitation. You can't force compassion. Compassion is an invitation, in fact, I would say. An invitation to see things differently. That's what Jesus does. Jesus says they do not need to go away. They do not need to go away. You know, we always want to push people in need or people that are struggling away. We want to push them away because we don't want to look at that. It's hard for us to look upon suffering. I don't want to look at that. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't like that, right? But Jesus is inviting the disciples to see things differently, to take an honest look at what's going on and to see it differently than they have been. They do not need to go away, Jesus says. They're not a problem. They're people. Verse 16, Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." This, "they do not need to go away," is an invitation to compassion. Jesus is inviting them to come to see things differently. And he does tell them they can do something. You give them something to eat. You have something to offer. He invites them to see the situation differently. They do not need to go away. What if they didn't need to go away? What if you could give them something to eat? It's an invitation. When I was in college, I had a film teacher who once told a story of 2 interviews he saw back-to-back with 2 different film directors. One of them was this sort of edgy avant-garde director, and he said in his interview, what I want to do is shock my audience into the story, into the film. Like pushing them in a pool of cold water. I want to shock them at the beginning. And the other filmmaker, who's also kind of this avant-garde filmmaker, said, no, I do it very differently. I want to take my audience by the hand and say, come with me into this story that I'm telling. Jesus is doing what the second filmmaker did. He's inviting them. Let me invite you into a different story, Jesus says. They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. But the disciples resist at first. Of course they do. All we've got, they say, are 5 loaves and 2 fish. They're still thinking about the problem. We don't have enough to fix the problem, Jesus. We only have 5 loaves of bread, and they're only like this big, as loaves that they had at that time were. 5 loaves and 2 fish, it's not enough to feed all of these people. And they're right. Any rational person would take a look at that situation and say, yeah, the disciples are right. They don't have enough to solve the problem. We can't feed everyone, the disciples say. Neither can we. We can't feed all the hungry people out there. We can't house all the unhoused people out there. We can't comfort all the hurting people, heal all the sick people, hang out with all the lonely people. But compassion doesn't mean being able to fix all the world's problems, to solve all the problems, to meet all the needs. In fact, I think that one of the things that's most important about compassion is it's about responding in a human way in situations even when we can't do much. Compassion doesn't mean we fix everything. It's an invitation to see people differently and to come alongside them, just as Jesus does for us. I think compassion comes in precisely when we can't solve the problem or fix it. That's part of the point of it. Compassion is formed from 2 words that mean suffering with. Suffering with. Word origins like that are not always a good way to know what words mean. They're kind of dubious sometimes. But this one works, I think. To have compassion is to suffer with, to come alongside those who are struggling or suffering. It's about listening. It's about being present. And yes, it is about offering what help that we can. We'll talk more about playing a role in addressing big picture issues next week when we talk about justice, kind of the other side of it. Justice addresses systemic issues, but compassion is more personal. Compassion can and certainly does lead to helping, but it begins with seeing people differently. Notice that Jesus invites them to see the people differently before he tells them to do anything about it. He says they do not need to go away. Change the way you're viewing this, before he gives them the suggestion on how they could help. You give them something to eat. Compassion really begins, my point is, with how we see others. Compassion begins with how we see others. And this passage began, you'll remember, with Jesus having compassion on the crowd. That's how it all started. Refusing to dismiss them, ignore them, or see them just as a problem. And he invites the disciples to do the same. He tells them to give them something to eat, and as I said, the disciples protest they don't have enough. So Jesus answers, bring them here to me. Bring the loaves and bring me what you got. Jesus says, bring the loaves and fishes to me. If we take an honest look at the needs of our community, the suffering and poverty of so many, greed and violence of this world, it's easy to be overwhelmed. It's easy to be overwhelmed, to think I can't possibly do enough to address this. But we all do have something to offer. We have our own loaves and fish. And Jesus says, bring them to me. So we bring them to Jesus. We lay them at the feet of Jesus, and it ends up being enough. We bring our time and talents and treasures. We lay them at the feet of Jesus, and it's enough. We do what we can. You know the rest. You know the rest of the story, I'm sure. Jesus performs a great miracle. He multiplies the loaves and fish and feeds the crowd. It's a miracle that speaks to God's ability to provide and the importance of sharing and giving what we have. Those are good lessons. But I think what I want us to remember today is that it all began with and would not have been possible without compassion. Without compassion. You know, compassion is what happens when we put love of neighbor, Jesus' command to love your neighbor, when we put that into practice in a personal way. That's really what compassion is all about. And so at the start of this new year, as we do this kind of spiritual check-in, it's a good time to think about, how are we doing that? How are we doing with that? Putting this love your neighbor into practice. So I want to just consider a couple of quick things before we close. First, what gets in the way of compassion? What holds us back from having compassion? And second, how can we grow in that area? What holds us back from compassion? First, it's not hard to come up with a lot of those. I think we know intuitively. You can probably think of some things that hold you back from having compassionate responses to folks sort of intuitively. I mean, busyness is a huge one for folks say, I just don't have time for this. I just don't have time for it. Tiredness or exhaustion. I've given already. I got kids. I got a job. I got things going on. I've already given so much. I mentioned judgment before. They've brought this on themselves. They did this to themselves. And finally, I think fear. Fear is like, well, what if it doesn't go right? What if I try to help and it backfires on me in some way? And those are legitimate concerns in many cases. However, I think it's important to acknowledge them for what they are. When you're sort of faced with that push and pull of those, I want to have compassion on this person, but then, that judgment or fear or busyness is pulling at you, it's important just to recognize it for what it is. It doesn't always mean that it's wrong. Sometimes you won't have time to help someone, and that's okay. But acknowledging those for what they are as things that are holding you back from compassion. And then just doing what we can. Not being so overwhelmed by all of the needs, but okay, well, I can't stop and give every person something, but maybe I can make this one, donation from time to time. I can't really fix this person's problems, but I can listen. I can offer support and a listening ear in that way. So how can we grow in compassion? First of all, it starts with, just as it did with Jesus, that invitation to see things differently. Can we see people differently? Pray for God to give you new eyes to see people differently, not as problems, but as people. And then slow down. If busyness is an obstacle to compassion, then slowing down and being able to see people, come alongside them, listening, all those things take what? They all take time, right? Slow down. Listen to people. Slowing down is really important because sometimes I think when it comes to compassion, we jump too quickly into wanting to do something, help. But remember, compassion is about coming alongside, struggling with, suffering with. And then start small. It's okay to start small. Do what you can. If all you can give is listening, give that. I want to close, as we finish this time talking about compassion, I want to close with another verse that I think sums up quite well what it is that God asks us to do when it comes to compassion. It's Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. It says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." Amen.
If it's bandaging the broken or washing filthy feet, here I am, Lord, send me. If it's loving one another, even when we don't agree, here I am, Lord, send me. If I'm poor, if I'm wealthy, I will serve you just the same. Here I am, Lord, send me. On the mountain or the valley, I will choose to praise. Here I am, Lord, send me. If I'm not my how I love, let my life reflect how much I love you. I love you. And before you even ask, oh, my answer will be yes, 'cause I love you. I love you. If the truth cuts like an arrow, I will say it anyway. 'Cause here I am, Lord, send me. If it means that they'll reject me, Lord, I will still obey. 'Cause here I am, Lord, send me. If I'm not my how I love, let my life reflect how much I love you. I love you. And before you even ask, oh, my answer will be yes, 'cause I love you. I love you. Oh, I love you, God, yeah. When I'm standing in your glory, I'll be glad I chose to say, here I am, Lord, send me. Well done, good and faithful, I live to hear you say, here I am, Lord, send me. Here I am, Lord, send me. Here I am, Lord, send me. I love you. I love you. And before you even ask for my answer will be yes, 'cause I love you. I love you. If I'm known by how I love, let my life reflect how much I love you. I love you. And before you even ask for my answer will be yes, 'cause I love you. I love you. Here I am, Lord, send me. Here